Clara Whitfield did not cry when the auctioneer called her name. She had promised herself that much. She stood straight-backed under the Kansas sun, hands clasped in front of her flour-sack dress, while men she had known her whole life placed bids on her like she was a mule at market. Her father's debts, her mother's grave. $43 and no other options. The hammer came down. And then, before the dust even settled, she heard small boots hitting the dirt, running hard. 3 of them. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, please hit that subscribe button and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The summer of 1878 was the cruelest Dry Creek, Kansas had seen in a decade. The wells had gone shallow by June. The creek that gave the town its name was barely a trickle of rust-colored water cutting through cracked earth. Corn had failed in half the county. Cattle were lean. Tempers were shorter. And on the morning of July 14th, Eleanor Whitfield's only daughter stood on the steps of the Dry Creek Mercantile in a dress that had been mended 4 times, waiting to be sold. The town called it a settlement auction. That was the polite word for it. When a man died owing debts he could not pay, the bank had ways of collecting. Sometimes it was land, sometimes livestock. Sometimes it was the women left behind. Clara had understood, in a cold and practical way, what her father's death meant. He had borrowed against everything: the house, the horses, the small plot of vegetable garden her mother had kept alive through 3 droughts. When the fever took him in May, it took every scrap of security with him. The banker, Mr. Aldous Fitch, had been very clear. "You can pay what's owed," he told her, standing in her kitchen 2 days after the funeral, his hat in his hands, but his eyes on the deed on the table. "Or you can enter a domestic contract arrangement, and the debt is cleared." Clara had been 22 years old, standing over her mother's cookstove, and she had looked at him and said, very quietly, "I understand." She did not cry then, either. She was her mother's daughter. The auction drew a crowd, the way shameful things always do. Men came from ranches and farms out to the county line. Women came from town, standing in small clusters near the dry goods store, whispering behind their hands. Children were there too, though their mothers tried to steer them away. Clara stood on the top step of the mercantile and looked out over all of them and felt something harden in her chest. Not bitterness, not fear, something more like iron. Aldous Fitch cleared his throat and read from his paper. Debt amount, terms of contract, length of arrangement. His voice was the practiced voice of a man who had done this before and would do it again. Clara did not listen. She already knew the numbers. She had counted them herself, 3 nights running, by candlelight at her kitchen table, trying to find another way out. There wasn't one. Opening bid, $15. A man in a brown hat called out 17. A farmer she vaguely recognized offered 20. Back and forth it went, and Clara kept her eyes on the far end of the street, on a point somewhere past all of them. Somewhere that didn't exist yet. 35. 38. 40. Then a voice she didn't recognize. 43. It was flat, certain. Not the voice of a man who was haggling. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision before he arrived, and was simply announcing it. The crowd shifted. Heads turned. Clara turned too. He was standing at the back of the crowd, slightly apart from the rest, like he hadn't quite decided whether he was part of it. Tall, weathered in the particular way that men get when they spend most of their lives outside. Not old exactly, but worn, dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown. He wore a plain work shirt, no vest, no tie, no effort at all to dress up for the occasion. His name, she would learn later, was Ethan Walker. He wasn't looking at her the way the other men had been. He wasn't looking at her like a purchase or a prize or a problem to be solved. He was looking at her like he was sorry. That was the thing that surprised her most. Not the bid, the apology in his eyes. Fitch raised his gavel. "Going once." $43, a woman near the front muttered to her neighbor. "For a schoolteacher's daughter. Shame." "Shame's cheaper than $43, the neighbor replied. The gavel came down. Sold. Clara breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth, and squared her shoulders, and began to walk down the steps. And that was when she heard it. Small boots, running hard. The sound of children who had not been taught yet to walk at a respectful pace in public. 3 boys shoved through the crowd like they hadn't noticed there was one. The smallest one, he couldn't have been more than 4, dark-eyed and serious, reached her first. He didn't say a word. He grabbed a fistful of her skirt with both hands and held on. The middle boy was maybe 7, with an angry slash of a mouth and red-rimmed eyes that said he'd been crying recently and was furious about it. He planted himself in front of her and crossed his arms. "You ain't leavin'," he announced. "The last one left after 2 days. You ain't doing that." The oldest, 10 maybe, with his father's jaw and something desperate living behind his eyes, looked at her for a long moment. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked, the way children look at things they've been hoping for too long. "My name's Noah," he said finally. "That's Caleb, and that's Micah." He paused. "We need somebody to stay." Clara looked down at the 3 of them. Then she looked back at Ethan Walker, who had come forward through the crowd and was standing a few feet away, hat in his hands. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, like a man who had planned a transaction and found himself inside something much larger. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Miss Whitfield." His voice was low, careful. "I want you to know that I—" He stopped, started again. "The boys needed—" He stopped a second time. "I understand the arrangement," Clara said. She kept her voice even, professional. "I'll need a day to collect my things from the house." "Of course." "And I'll need to know what you expect of me." Something moved across his face. It might have been relief. It might have been guilt. Cooking, keeping the house, helping with the boys. He glanced at them. Micah still had her skirt. Mostly the boys. Clara looked down at the small fist still clutching the fabric of her dress. She reached down, very gently, and covered that little hand with her own. "Then that's where we'll start," she said. The Walker Ranch sat 7 miles outside of Dry Creek, at the end of a rutted track that turned left off the main road just past a dead cottonwood tree. Clara rode beside Ethan on the wagon bench in silence for most of the trip. The 3 boys crowded into the wagon bed behind them. She could hear them back there. Caleb and Noah arguing in hushed tones about something she couldn't quite make out. Micah saying nothing at all. The silence between her and Ethan was not comfortable, but it was honest. Finally, she said, "How long has it been?" He didn't pretend not to understand. 14 months. How old was Micah? 3. She absorbed that. A 3-year-old who had lost his mother. No wonder the child didn't speak much. "What happened to her?" Clara asked. Ethan's hands tightened briefly on the reins. "Fever. Same as your father, sounds like." He paused. "It came fast." "I'm sorry." "Me too." Another stretch of silence. "The other women," Clara said. "The ones who came before me. How many?" "2. He said it like the word cost him something. First one lasted a week. Said the boys were too much. Second one, he exhaled slowly. Caleb locked her out of the house. From the wagon bed, Caleb's voice floated forward, unrepentant. She called Micah stupid. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "She's not here," he said. "That's all that matters." Clara turned slightly to look back at Caleb. The boy's jaw was set. He was already bracing for her reaction, for anger, for disappointment, for the particular kind of adult punishment that comes from telling the truth at the wrong moment. She turned back around. "Smart boy," she said quietly. Caleb blinked. "What?" "I said you're smart." She kept her eyes on the road ahead. A woman who calls a child stupid isn't fit to be around children. You were right to be rid of her. A long pause from the wagon bed. Then, with great suspicion, "Pa didn't think so." "Your pa is an adult. Adults have to be polite, even when they shouldn't be." Clara glanced sideways at Ethan, who was staring straight ahead with a carefully neutral expression. "I'm going to try not to do that." Another silence. Then Noah's voice, cautious and testing. "You a school teacher?" "My father was. I helped him for 3 years." "Can you do sums?" "I can." "Can you do the kind of sums that tell you if a cattle ledger's been done wrong?" Clara looked back at him. Noah was watching her with an expression that was half challenge and half something desperately hopeful. "Yes," she said. "That kind too." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked away, like he'd seen something he wasn't ready to deal with yet. The ranch was not what she'd expected. She had expected worse, and also, somehow, better. She wasn't quite sure which. What she found was a place that had been carefully built by someone who loved it, and then slowly abandoned by someone who had stopped having the energy to love anything. The house was solid. Good timber, proper foundations. Someone, Ellen Walker, she imagined, had planted roses along the porch rail. They were overgrown now, leggy and wild, but still blooming in stubborn bursts of red. The fences were another story. 3 sections of the north fence had come down and been propped back up with what looked like determination rather than skill. The barn needed its roof patched. The kitchen garden was mostly weeds, with some determined vegetables pushing through anyway. And everywhere, the particular disorder of a home being kept by a man who was trying his best and not quite succeeding. Clara stood in the doorway of the main house and took it all in. "It's not," Ethan started. "It's a good house," she said. "I can see what it was." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife built the garden." "I know." "How do you know?" "Because you've let everything else go, and those roses are still standing." Clara stepped inside. Nobody maintains roses by accident. She heard him exhale behind her. It was a small sound, like something releasing that had been held too long. The first 3 days were a study in resistance. Not from Ethan. He kept his distance with a kind of rigid, uncomfortable courtesy, the behavior of a man who was very aware of the strange situation he'd put both of them in, and was trying to give her as much space as the small house allowed. He was up before dawn, back after dark. He ate what she cooked with brief, genuine thanks and excused himself early. The resistance came from the boys. Caleb broke 2 of her hairpins on the first morning, though whether by accident or design was impossible to say. Noah refused to come to the table for the first meal, until Micah tugged on his sleeve and said, in his small voice, "She made biscuits, Noah." He came then, unwillingly, but he came. Micah was the most interesting. He said very little, but he watched everything. He had a particular habit of appearing in doorways and simply standing there, observing, like a small, silent judge. She would be stirring something at the stove and look up to find him in the kitchen doorway. She would be hanging washing and find him on the porch steps, watching. On the third day, she said, "You can help if you want." He considered this for a long moment. Then he came over and took one corner of the sheet she was trying to hang, and they did it together, without speaking. That was enough, for now. It was Noah who gave her the first real opening. She found him in the evenings, after supper, after Caleb's bath, after Micah was tucked in, sitting at the kitchen table with a cattle ledger that was clearly too complicated for a 10-year-old, but that he was attacking with grim determination anyway. She sat down across from him without being invited. "Your father's books?" she asked. "He don't—" Noah caught himself. "He doesn't know I look at them. But somebody's gotta." Clara turned the ledger to face her and read in silence for a moment. The numbers were not good. She already knew the ranch was struggling. The drought had taken a toll on everyone out here. But the actual figures were worse than she'd guessed. "You understand what these mean?" she asked. "I understand we're short. You understand by how much?" He met her eyes directly, very adult, very scared. "Enough that if something don't change by fall, we lose the cattle. Maybe the land after that." Clara set the ledger down and looked at him for a moment. "All right," she said. "Show me what you figured out so far." He stared at her. "You not going to tell Pa I had his books out?" "Are you planning to do something useful with them?" "I was trying to." "Then no," Clara said. "Show me." For the next 2 hours, they sat at that kitchen table together, a 22-year-old woman and a 10-year-old boy, and they went through every line of the Walker Ranch accounts. She asked questions. He answered. She pointed out things he'd missed. He pointed out things she hadn't considered. Because he knew this land and these cattle in a way she didn't yet. When she finally blew out the lamp and told him to go to bed, Noah stood up and gathered the ledgers carefully. He was quiet for a moment. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Clara is fine." He shook his head. "Miss Whitfield." Deliberate, respectful, like he was choosing it. "You're the first one who talked to me like I wasn't just a kid." She looked at him, this boy with his father's jaw and his mother's roses, and said, "You're not just a kid. You're the oldest Walker son, and this is your ranch too. Don't forget that." He didn't say anything else. He just went to bed. But in the morning, when she came downstairs, he had set the table, all 4 places, without being asked. She heard about Harold Boone for the first time from the woman at the dry goods store. She had driven the wagon into town for supplies, alone, the boys having been left with grudging instructions from Ethan to behave themselves, and was loading flour into the back when the storekeeper's wife, a woman named Agnes Pruitt with sharp eyes and a kindly face, leaned over the counter and lowered her voice. "You be careful with Harold Boone," Agnes said. Clara looked up. "I don't know that name." "You will." Agnes glanced toward the door. "He's been wanting the Walker land for 2 years. Came right up to Ethan last spring with an offer, and Ethan told him where he could put it." She paused. "Boone doesn't forget things like that. And now that he knows Ethan brought in a girl from the settlement auction," she shook her head, "he'll use it. Men like Boone always find the soft place to push." Clara finished loading the flour. "What exactly is he saying?" "That Ethan's desperate. That a man who buys himself a wife from an auction block is a man whose ranch is already done." Agnes folded her hands on the counter. "That you're—" she hesitated. "That you're not a proper arrangement." Clara straightened up and looked at her. And what do you think? Agnes studied her for a moment. Then she smiled, small and certain. I think you're the first person who's made those boys set a table in 14 months. I think that counts for something. Clara drove home with the flower, and with something cold and clear settling in her chest. Harold Boone. She filed the name carefully, the way her father had taught her to file important things. Not for fear, for when she needed it. The night Caleb cried was the night she understood what she was actually doing here. It was past midnight. A thunderstorm had moved through without warning, the way summer storms did in Kansas, sudden and loud and over, almost before you registered it had started. She lay in her small room off the kitchen, listening to the last of it roll east, and thought she might be able to sleep now. Then she heard it. From the room the boys shared, muffled, like someone had their face in a pillow. She got up. Caleb was curled on his side, the pillow over his head, and even muffled, she could hear how hard he was working not to make noise. The kind of crying that's been held in for a long time. Beside him, Noah lay awake and rigid, staring at the ceiling, jaw clenched, not looking over. Micah was already awake. He was sitting up in his small bed across the room, watching his brother with those dark, serious eyes. Clara sat on the edge of Caleb's bed. She didn't say anything. She didn't tell him it would be all right, because he was 7 years old, and he already knew that was the kind of thing adults said when they didn't have anything real to offer. She didn't tell him to be quiet. She didn't ask what was wrong, because she already knew. She just put her hand on his back, between his shoulder blades, and kept it there. The crying got worse for a minute. Then it started to ease. I don't want you to leave, Caleb said into the pillow. It came out ugly and raw, the way truth sounds when it's been packed down too long. Everyone leaves. Mama left, the other ladies left. Everyone always leaves. I know, Clara said. You don't know. His voice cracked. You weren't here. You're right. I wasn't. So you don't know. He finally pulled the pillow away and looked at her. His face was blotched and furious and broken open. Why would you stay? Nobody stays. Clara looked at him for a long time. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I'll tell you this. I'm not leaving tomorrow. I'm not leaving next week. And every morning I'm still here, that's me choosing to be. All right? He stared at her. That's not a real promise. No, she agreed, but it's a real answer. And I think you've had enough fake promises to know the difference. His jaw wobbled. He looked away. Then, quietly, he said, Will you sit here till I fall asleep? Yes, Clara said. She sat there for an hour, long after Caleb's breathing went slow and even, long after Noah had finally rolled over and gone still, long after Micah had lain back down and tucked himself under his quilt. When she finally stood up to go, she found Ethan Walker in the doorway. He had not come in. He was standing just at the threshold, like crossing it would have been too much. He looked at the 3 sleeping boys, and then at her, and in the low light, she could see an expression on his face she hadn't expected to find there. Not the stiff courtesy he usually showed her, not the awkward guilt. Something wrecked and grateful in equal measure. Thank you, he said, very quiet, like it barely made it out. Clara looked at him, this closed-off, grief-worn, desperately trying man, and said, just as quietly, They're good boys, Mr. Walker. Every one of them. He nodded once. His throat moved. Then he walked away, back down the hall, and Clara stood in the doorway of the boys' room for another moment, listening to them breathe. She was bought in summer heat, but something in her knew, standing there in the dark, something clear and certain, that what came next would not be a transaction. Whatever it was It was already something else entirely, and it had only just begun. The morning after the storm, Ethan Walker did not look at her differently. He sat at the breakfast table with the same rigid courtesy he always had, thanked her for the eggs, and was out the door before the boys finished eating. But Clara noticed something. He had fixed the loose step on the porch. It had been broken since she arrived, the third step from the bottom that groaned and dropped a half-inch every time she crossed it. She hadn't said a word about it. She had simply stepped around it, the way she stepped around everything here that wasn't hers to fix yet. But it was fixed now. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. That was the Walker way, she was beginning to understand. Things got said sideways, or not at all. Feelings were performed in small physical acts, a fixed step, a table set without being asked, a small hand reaching for a skirt in a crowd. The Walker men, all four of them, spoke a language that had almost no words in it. She was starting to learn it anyway. Noah came to her that morning with the ledger before she'd even cleared the breakfast dishes. He didn't ask permission this time. He just put it on the table, opened to the page they'd left off at, and sat down across from her and waited. 3 things, she said, not looking up from the page. The south herd is being rotated wrong. They're eating the same ground twice, and the grass isn't recovering. Second, whoever's been buying feed at Gunderson's store has been paying retail when you should be on a bulk contract. That's costing your father $8 a month he doesn't have. What's the third? Noah asked. She looked up at him. Your father doesn't know any of this. Noah's jaw tightened. He knows the big picture. He doesn't know the details, and right now, the details are where the ranch survives or doesn't. She held his gaze. He needs to know, Noah. He won't listen to me. I'm 10. He'll listen to me, Clara said. But I need you to be there when I tell him. Because some of this was your thinking, and he should know that. Something flickered in the boy's face, too complicated to name. Pride and fear, and the particular longing of a child who wants desperately to be taken seriously by his father, and has learned not to count on it. He's going to be angry I had his books out. Probably, Clara said. Let me handle that part. Noah studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way men twice his age nodded when they'd made a decision they weren't entirely sure about, but were committing to anyway. They found Ethan at the north fence, alone, working on the section that had been propped up since before she arrived. He was restringing wire with the focused mechanical efficiency of a man who used physical work to keep his thoughts from going somewhere worse. He heard them coming and didn't stop. Mr. Walker, Clara said. Got a fence to finish. I know. This won't take long. She stopped a few feet away, Noah at her side. I've been looking at your accounts. That stopped him. He turned slowly. His eyes went to Noah first, quick and sharp. Noah stood his ground, chin up, not apologizing for anything. Ethan looked back at Clara. You went through my books, he said, very flat. Noah went through them first. He's been trying to find a way to help you for months. She kept her voice even. He's got good instincts. You should know that. The expression on Ethan's face shifted through several things quickly. Anger, surprise, and something she couldn't name yet. He looked at his oldest son. Noah stared back at him, jaw clenched, waiting for the punishment. It didn't come. What did you find? Ethan asked. Clara told him. All of it. The grazing rotation, the feed contract, 2 additional points they hadn't spoken about yet. A line item she suspected was being skimmed by one of the hired hands, and a cattle count that didn't match the ledger by 11 head. She spoke clearly and without softening any of it, because she had found that men like Ethan Walker did not want softening. They wanted the truth, and they wanted it straight. When she finished, He was quiet for a long moment. 11 head, he said. That's what the count shows. His gaze sharpened. You're saying someone's been stealing my cattle? I'm saying the numbers don't match. You know this land better than I do. You tell me what that means. He turned away from both of them and looked out across the north pasture, and Clara watched the tension move through his back and shoulders like weather. A long minute passed. Then he said, without turning around, Ray Decker's been with me 3 years. I know, she said. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm telling you what the ledger says. Another silence. Then, quietly and with great restraint, Noah. He said the boy's name without turning. You did good. Noah made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He looked at Clara, and she could see the thing happening behind his eyes. That hard-packed, careful hope cracking open slightly at the seam. She gave him the smallest nod. He looked away and sniffed once, like he'd gotten something in his nose. Fix the grazing rotation first, Clara said. I'll write to the bulk supplier in Salina about the feed contract this week. And I'd like to do a proper count of the south herd, if you'll show me how. Ethan finally turned back around. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. Not courtesy, not guilt. Something more like assessment. Like he was measuring something and it was coming up larger than he'd expected. You know cattle, he said. No, she said honestly. But I know numbers, and I can learn the rest. If you'll teach me. He held her gaze. All right, he said. And then, after a pause that felt significant in a way she didn't fully understand yet, Clara. It was the first time he had used her name. She walked back to the house and kept her face perfectly composed until she was inside. Then she exhaled slowly and pressed one hand flat against the kitchen table and let herself feel, for just a moment, what it meant to be doing something real. She had been here 12 days. She was still standing. That felt like enough. For now. The thing about Caleb was that his anger was always honest. It never hid. He didn't simmer the way Noah did, swallowing everything down into something cold and controlled. Caleb's feelings lived right at the surface, always ready, always loud. Clara had learned quickly that managing Caleb meant never flinching and never retreating, because the moment she did either of those things, he would push harder. He wasn't cruel. He was a frightened child who had discovered that aggression was a reliable way to find out whether someone was going to stay. He broke one of her mother's mixing bowls on day 14, knocked it off the shelf. She was almost certain on purpose, and then stood there, watching her face with a ferocious, terrible intensity, waiting. She bent down and picked up the largest piece, turned it in her hands. Her mother had brought that bowl from Missouri. She had been making bread in it since before Clara was born. That bowl was my mother's, Clara said. She kept her voice very quiet. Caleb's chin came up, defiant, waiting for the anger he'd earned. And you're going to help me clean it up, she continued. And then you're going to tell me why you did it. I didn't mean to. She looked at him directly. Yes, you did. His jaw worked. You can't prove that. I don't need to prove it. I was watching your hands. She set the piece of bowl on the table. Get the broom, Caleb. He got it. They cleaned it up in silence. When the last piece was in the rubbish, he stood there with the broom handle and didn't look at her. And finally, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound like it didn't matter, said, What if I keep breaking things? Then we'll keep cleaning them up, Clara said, and we'll keep talking. What if I break something you can't fix? She crossed her arms and leaned against the counter and looked at him. Is that what you're actually asking me? Or are you asking whether I'll leave? The silence that followed was the longest one Caleb had ever given her. He was 7 years old, and he was staring at the floor like the answer to something essential was written there. And Clara felt something in her chest pull hard in his direction. This furious, breaking, fiercely loving child. "Both," he finally said. "I already told you my answer to the second question," she said. "As for the first, I haven't found anything you can break that matters more to me than you do. And I used to think that bowl was at the top of the list." He looked up, quick and involuntary. "Really?" "Really." She pushed off the counter. "Now come outside. I need help with the garden, and you've got energy to burn." He followed her without another word, but she caught him as they passed through the door, reaching out and very briefly touching the frame of it, just a graze of his fingertips against the wood, the way a child touches something they're not sure is real yet. It was Agnes Pruitt who told her about Harold Boone's visit to the bank. Agnes came out to the ranch herself, which was unusual enough to be significant, arriving in her husband's buggy on a Thursday afternoon with a jar of pickled beets and the expression of a woman who has decided to do something uncomfortable because it's necessary. "He went to Fitch," Agnes said, sitting at Clara's kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. "2 days ago. I heard it from Margaret Dillon, whose husband works at the bank." She paused. "He told Fitch that Ethan Walker is unstable, that bringing a girl from an auction into his home with 3 children is evidence of poor judgment, that the ranch is mismanaged and the loan should be called in early." Clara set down her cup. "He doesn't have the authority to call in the loan himself," she said. "No," Agnes agreed, "but Fitch does. And Boone and Fitch go back a long way." She met Clara's eyes. "He's not just after the land, sweetheart. He's trying to take everything." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Does Ethan know?" "I don't know what Ethan knows. That man doesn't talk to anyone about anything." Agnes looked at her. "But you talk to him." "I'm starting to." "Start faster." Agnes stood, smoothed her skirt, and took one more sip of her coffee. "Boone's going to move at the town meeting next month. He's going to make this public. He's going to stand up in front of everyone in Dry Creek and question Ethan's fitness and your presence here. And he's going to do it with a smile on his face, because men like Boone always smile when they're doing their worst work." After Agnes left, Clara sat at the kitchen table alone for a long time. She thought about the ledger and the 11 missing cattle. She thought about Ray Decker, who had been with Ethan 3 years and might be stealing from him. She thought about the bank and Harold Boone and Aldous Fitch, and the particular geometry of powerful men moving against a man who was already on his knees. Then she got up and started writing. She wrote 3 letters, one to the bulk supplier in Salina, one to the county land office, requesting a copy of the Walker Ranch deed and the terms of the current bank loan, and one, carefully, precisely, without a single wasted word, to her father's old colleague, a lawyer named Edmund Marsh, who practiced in Wichita and who owed her father a debt of a different kind. She didn't tell Ethan what she was doing, not yet. She needed to know what she was dealing with before she handed him something else to carry. It was Micah who told her first. She was in the garden, weeding in the late afternoon heat, when Micah appeared beside her, as he always did, silently, from nowhere, and crouched down to look at what she was doing. "Those are weeds," he said, which was more words than he usually strung together at once. "I know." She handed him a small trowel. "You can pull those ones there, the ones with the flat leaves." He took the trowel with great seriousness and began working beside her. They stayed like that for a while, comfortable in the shared quiet, before Micah said, without looking up from the dirt, "Daddy cried last night." Clara's hands went still. "After supper," Micah continued, very matter of fact, the way small children sometimes state devastating things. In the barn, I went to find my ball, and I heard him. He pulled a weed loose, inspected it, set it aside. He does it in the barn so we don't hear, but I always hear. Clara sat back on her heels and looked at this small boy with his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness and his own private, careful soul. "Did you let him know you were there?" she asked. "No," Micah considered this. "He wouldn't want that." "You're probably right," she said. "He's sad about Mama." Micah said it simply, not as a revelation, just as a fact he'd been holding for a long time. "He thinks it's his fault she died." "Why do you think that?" "Because he told Noah." He pulled another weed. "I wasn't supposed to be listening, but I was. He said he should have gotten the doctor sooner, and he didn't because he thought it was just a fever, and by the time he went for Doc Hensley, it was—" He paused. Too late. Clara felt the full weight of that land on her chest. "Micah," she said carefully, "did you ever tell your daddy that you know that?" "No." "Would you want to?" He was quiet for a long time, turning the small trowel in his hands. Then, "Do you think it would help him?" "I think," Clara said slowly, "that your daddy has been carrying that alone for a long time. And I think sometimes knowing that someone else knows and isn't angry helps more than anything else." Micah thought about this with the intense, unhurried seriousness that he brought to everything. "You could tell him," he said finally. "You're better at saying things." Clara looked at him, this 4-year-old who had watched and listened and understood more than anyone knew. "You sure?" He nodded, very certain. "All right," she said. "I'll find a way." She found Ethan at the barn after supper, just as Micah had said, in the in-between hour when the boys were settling and the work of the day was done, and there was nothing left to do but feel whatever had been waiting all day to be felt. He was at the workbench, doing something with a piece of harness leather that didn't really need doing. "Mr. Walker," she said from the doorway. "Ethan." He said it without looking up. "You can call me Ethan." "Ethan." She came in and stood near the workbench and said, without any softening, "Micah knows about your wife, about what you blame yourself for." His hands stopped. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. She could feel it pressing against the walls of the barn, heavy and old and long-held. "He's 4, Ethan said. "He was 3 when it happened. He's been listening ever since." She paused. "He wanted me to tell you something." Ethan finally looked at her. His face was very controlled, the expression of a man holding something back through sheer force of will. "He doesn't blame you," Clara said. "None of them do. I think you should know that." The control held for exactly 3 more seconds. Then something shifted in his face, a crack in the stone, small but real. And he turned away and put both hands flat on the workbench and breathed. She didn't look away. She didn't give him privacy by pretending not to see. She simply stood there and let him have it. This moment of someone finding out that the verdict he'd issued against himself was not the one his children were living under. After a long moment, he said very roughly, "He's a good boy." "He's extraordinary," Clara said. "They all are." She let that sit for a second. "And they need their father present. All of him. Not just the parts that are still functioning." He made a sound that might have been a broken laugh. "You don't pull your punches." "No," she agreed. "But I don't throw them without reason either." He stood up straight and turned back to face her, and something had changed in his face. Not fixed. Nothing was fixed, and she didn't think it was supposed to happen that fast. But something had moved, like a door that had been sealed for 14 months, shifting a half-inch on its hinges. "The town meeting," he said. "I heard about Boone." She went still. "How?" "Jim Pruitt, Agnes's husband." A pause. "Agnes talks to you, Jim talks to me. Different methods, same destination." Something flickered in his eyes that might, under other circumstances, have been dry amusement. "You wrote letters." "3 of them." He looked at her for a moment. "To who?" "A supplier, the land office, and a lawyer in Wichita." The silence stretched. Then, "You're already fighting for this place." It wasn't quite a question. Clara held his gaze and said, "Someone has to." He was quiet for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, in a voice that was doing its best to stay even and not quite managing it, he said, "I don't know what to do with you, Clara Whitfield." "You don't have to do anything with me," she said. "I'm not a problem to be solved. I'm a person who's decided to help." She picked up her lamp from where she'd set it near the door. "Good night, Ethan." She walked back to the house through the summer dark, and behind her she heard, very quiet, so quiet it was almost swallowed by the night, "Good night." 2 days later, she found out about the 11th missing cow, and the man who'd taken her. Ray Decker had not been stealing. Ray Decker had been covering for someone else. And that someone was far closer to the Walker Ranch than anyone had suspected. Ray Decker was a lean, sun-darkened man who said almost nothing and meant everything he said. He had worked the Walker Ranch for 3 years, and in that time he had shown up every morning before light and left every evening after dark, and asked for nothing beyond his wage and a fair deal. Clara had watched him for 2 weeks, and her instinct said he was honest. But instinct wasn't a cattle count, and the numbers were still wrong. She found him at the water trough before breakfast and said, without preamble, "You didn't take those cattle." Ray Decker looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked away. "That's not a denial," she said. "No, ma'am," he said. "It ain't." "Then whose is it?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Tom Griggs came to me 6 weeks ago. Said he needed to run a few head to a buyer in Hayes City. Said he'd square it with Mr. Walker after." A pause. "I told him that wasn't how it worked. He said if I made trouble about it, he'd tell Boone that I was the one skimming." Clara felt everything click into place at once, clean and cold. Tom Griggs, the youngest of the hired hands, 20 years old, friendly-faced, quick to offer help with the heavy work. He had smiled at her every morning over breakfast, and she had thought him harmless. "Boone put him up to it," she said. It wasn't a question. Ray's jaw tightened. "Tom's got a sister whose land Boone's been after for 2 years. He's been squeezing them slow." He looked at her finally. "I couldn't prove any of it, and I couldn't lose this job. I got a family, Miss Whitfield." "I understand," she said. "You should have come to Mr. Walker." "Mr. Walker?" He stopped, started again. "He's a fair man, but he's been somewhere else since Mrs. Walker passed. You know what I mean." She knew exactly what he meant. She went to Ethan before the morning was out. She told him everything, straight and clean, no softening. She watched his face while she talked, and she saw several things move through it in quick succession. Anger. The particular cold fury of a man who'd been betrayed by someone under his roof. And then something harder settling in underneath. "Griggs is gone by noon," Ethan said. "Yes, but that's not the end of it." She held his gaze. Boone used Griggs to set you up. He wanted the cattle discrepancy discovered. He wanted it to look like mismanagement. That's what he's taking to the town meeting. Evidence that this ranch is out of control. Evidence he manufactured. Evidence he'll present as fact unless we get ahead of it. She put the letter from Edmund Marsh on the table between them. The lawyer had written back faster than she'd expected. My father's colleague in Wichita. He's looked at the bank loan terms. Fitch does not have legal authority to call the loan early without 60 days written notice and documented cause. Boone is counting on you not knowing that. Ethan read the letter. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at her with that measuring expression she was starting to recognize. You've been doing all of this, he said. Without telling me? I'm telling you now. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to know what I was dealing with before I handed you half a solution. She paused. I don't do things halfway. He was quiet. Then, with the careful precision of a man choosing his words, like a man choosing which wire to cut. You are the most unexpected thing that has ever happened to this ranch. It was not a simple compliment. It was the truth, spoken by a man who had forgotten what truth felt like when it came from another person. Don't get used to surprises, she said. Get used to results. Tom Griggs left before noon. He went without a scene, which told Clara everything about how guilty he knew himself to be. Ethan paid him through the end of the week. Clara noted that, the fairness of it, the refusal to be petty even in anger, and watched him ride off without a word. Ray Decker stayed. Ethan shook his hand at the fence line and said 3 words. I trust you. Ray nodded once. That was the Walker way, and Clara had learned by now that 3 words from Ethan Walker meant more than most men's paragraphs. Noah, who had been watching everything from the barn door with those sharp, nothing-escaping eyes of his, fell into step beside Clara as she walked back to the house. Tom was bad, he said. Tom made bad choices, she corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. A bad person doesn't know what they're doing wrong. Tom knew exactly what he was doing. She glanced down at him. Which means he could have chosen otherwise. That matters. Noah chewed on that. Boone's different, though. Yes, she agreed. Boone is different. He's not going to stop. No, she said, he's not. So what do we do? She looked down at this 10-year-old with his father's jaw and his mother's roses and his own fierce, clear-eyed intelligence, and she said, we go to the town meeting and we show them what this ranch is, what this family is. She paused. And we don't blink. Noah straightened slightly, like a soldier being told to hold a line. Okay, he said. Okay. The week before the town meeting was the strangest one Clara had spent at the Walker Ranch, which was saying something. Something had shifted in the house after the night in the barn. Not dramatically. Nothing in this family changed dramatically. Everything moved the way the Kansas plains moved, slow and inevitable, and larger than you noticed until you were already inside it. But Ethan had started staying for breakfast. The full meal, not just a quick cup and out the door. He sat at the table, and the boys sat with him, and they ate together. And it was not comfortable exactly, but it was real. Caleb, who tracked everything with the intensity of a child who had been let down too many times to stop watching for the next disappointment, noticed on the second morning. He looked at his father, then at Clara, then at his eggs. Then, very quietly, he said, You gonna do this every day now? Ethan looked at his middle son. If that's all right with you. Caleb stabbed a piece of egg with his fork. It's all right, he said, with the elaborate casualness of a child who is not going to let you know how much it mattered. Don't make it weird. Noah made a sound that was almost a laugh. Micah looked up from his plate and gave Ethan a very small, very certain smile. like he'd been waiting for this and had always known it was coming. Ethan looked at that smile, and something in his face did the thing it had been doing more often lately. That small, controlled flinching. Like a man learning to touch something he'd been afraid to touch. "I won't make it weird," he told Caleb.
"Good," Caleb said. "Pass the biscuits."
Clara kept her eyes on the table and did not smile. But it was a near thing. She taught Noah the bulk pricing calculations that afternoon. She helped Caleb mend the east fence section, standing in the summer heat watching him figure out the wire tension through trial and error, only stepping in when he asked. She sat with Micah in the evening while he drew pictures with a stick in the dirt. Detailed pictures, she noticed, of horses and fences, and the small figure that she eventually realized was herself, identifiable by the braid. "That's very good," she told him. "It's you," he said. "I know. I like the braid." He considered the drawing seriously. "You should always wear it like that," he said. "It means you're staying." She looked at him. "Where did you get that idea?" "Ladies who are leaving put their hair up tight." He traced the stick figure carefully. "You wear it loose. That means you're staying." She sat with that for a moment, this 4-year-old's private system of reading the world. "When did you figure that out?" she asked. "The second day," he said, very matter-of-fact. "I checked." She wanted to hold this child. She was learning to ask first. "Can I hug you?" she asked. He thought about it for 2 full seconds. Then he leaned sideways into her. Not quite a hug, more like a small, warm weight deciding where to rest. She put her arm around him, and they sat there in the evening quiet. And Clara looked out over the Walker land and thought about second days and loose braids and the private ways that children find to make sure they are safe. The storm came that Friday, without warning and without mercy. It had been building all day in the west, the sky going that particular yellow-green that Kansas farmers learn to respect before they learn anything else. Ethan had looked at it at noon and said they needed to get the north cattle into the lower pasture before it hit. He and Ray had ridden out together. He told the boys to stay in the house. Clara had Clara's word, and Ethan's, and that should have been enough. It was not enough. She was in the kitchen when she heard Caleb's voice outside, too far away. She was at the back door in 3 steps. What she saw was the north pasture fence down in 2 places, the propped sections that hadn't been properly fixed yet, and smoke, dirty and gray, rising from the grass on the far side of the ridge, where lightning had hit the dry ground, and 3 boys running toward it. She did not think. She moved. She went through the door, shouting Noah's name, and he turned at the sound of her voice. He was the farthest out, moving fast, having apparently decided that he was going to find his father. And she could see Caleb 20 yards behind him, and Micah, God help her, Micah, trotting along behind his brothers, because Micah went where his brothers went. "Noah Walker, stop right now!" The command came from somewhere she didn't know she had. It was not her usual voice. It was a voice that left no room for anything but compliance. Noah stopped. His head turned. His expression said he knew he was wrong, and was not prepared to admit it yet. She ran to him first, not because he was most in danger. Caleb was closer to the fence break, but because he was the one the others would follow if she could turn him. She grabbed his arm and pulled him to face her, and she said, low and fast and with everything she had, "You listen to me right now. Your father needs you safe, not involved. Do you understand that?" "The cattle are going to run through the breaks." "I know. I'll handle the cattle. Your job is Micah." She spun him toward his youngest brother. "You go get Micah, and you do not let go of him for any reason. Go." Something in her voice reached him. He went. She turned to Caleb. Caleb had stopped on his own, she realized, the moment she'd called Noah's name. He was standing perfectly still,
his face doing that thing it did when he was afraid and covering it with stubbornness. The smoke was moving toward them. She could feel the heat of it in the air, not close yet, but coming. "Caleb!" She reached him and crouched to his level. His eyes were wide. "I need you to do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" He nodded, once, hard. "Get to the east gate and open it. The cattle are going to need somewhere to go that isn't the fire. You know where the east gate latch is?" "Yes." "Go, fast. Don't stop for anything." She met his eyes. "You can do this. I know you can." He ran. No argument, no pushback, no testing. Just ran. Because she'd given him something real to do, and told him she believed he could do it. And that was all Caleb Walker had ever needed. She turned toward the smoke. The fire was running in the dry grass along the ridge, moving with the wind, pushing toward the north pasture. The cattle were already moving, uneasy, pressing against the fence. If they hit the broken sections, they'd scatter across 3 counties, and the Walker Ranch would be done by morning. She didn't have a horse. She didn't have time to get one. She grabbed the coil of rope from the fence post where it always hung, and she ran along the fence line, waving her arms, moving the cattle away from the break and toward the east gate that Caleb was opening right now. She had to believe Caleb was opening right now. She could hear the fire now. Low crackle, then louder, the sound of dry summer grass burning fast and hungry. The heat was pressing at her from the wrong side. She kept moving. The cattle were bunching, moving, uncertain. She shouted at them, waved the rope, made herself large and loud and impossible to ignore. Then she heard Ethan's voice from the ridge, shouting her name. She turned her head and saw him riding hard toward her from the north side, Ray Decker behind him. And the look on Ethan's face when he saw her at the fence line, when he understood what she had done and was doing, was something she didn't have time to process. "East gate!" she shouted at him. "Caleb's got it open! Push them east!" He didn't stop to argue. He turned his horse and started driving the cattle exactly the way she'd told him to, and Ray came up on the other side, and between the 3 of them, they moved the herd through the east gate in less time than she would have thought possible. She stood there in the open pasture, breathing hard, covered in dust and smelling of smoke, and she heard footsteps behind her. Noah had Micah on his back. Micah's arms were around his brother's neck, calm as a Sunday morning. Caleb came from the east gate at a flat run, his face flushed with the particular triumph of a child who has done an adult thing and knows it. "I got it open," he said, breathing hard. "Both latches." "I know," she said. "I counted on you." His chest was heaving. His eyes were very bright. "You did?" "I did." He opened his mouth, closed it. Then, with great dignity for a 7-year-old covered in dust and adrenaline, "Okay. Good." Ethan reached her 60 seconds later, sliding off his horse in one motion. He looked at her, then at the boys, then at the contained herd on the safe side of the gate, then back at her. His face was doing several things at once, and none of them had words. "The fence breaks are still open," she said. "Ray's on it." He took one step toward her and stopped, like he'd had to remind himself to stop. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Clara." Her name in his voice, rough and direct. "Are you hurt?" She looked at him. He was scared. She could see it clearly now, the fear that had been riding him hard since he'd seen her at the fence line. And it was not the fear of a man watching property get damaged. It was the fear of a man who had realized, somewhere on that ridge, riding hard toward smoke and a woman's figure against the fence, that the equation had changed. "I'm fine," she said. He exhaled. One long, controlled breath. Noah was watching them both with those eyes that never missed anything. Then he said, in his most careful voice, She told Caleb what to do. And he did it.
Ethan looked at his middle son. Caleb was still working on looking dignified, rather than bursting with something.
She told me she counted on me, Caleb said. So I just did it.
Ethan looked at Clara. She held his gaze steadily. There was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said. Micah, still on Noah's back, leaned his chin on his older brother's shoulder and looked at his father with those dark, certain eyes.
She knew what to do, he said simply. Even before you.
The 4 words hung in the dry summer air between all of them. Even before you. Ethan Walker looked at his youngest son, then at Clara. And something in his face did not just shift this time. It broke open, clean and honest. The way things break when they've been held too tight for too long, and something finally proves strong enough to hold them without the tension. Ray Decker came back from the fence and reported the breaks mended. The fire on the ridge was burning itself out against the rock shelf at the far end. Nowhere left to go. The cattle were calm. The boys were safe. Everything was standing. Ethan stood in the middle of all of it and looked at this woman he had bought at a settlement auction for $43, covered in ash and completely steady. And he understood something he had not understood on the day he'd raised his hand in that crowd. He had not saved her. She had saved all of them. The town meeting was in 4 days. Harold Boone would stand up and smile and try to take everything. Clara knew it. Ethan knew it. And for the first time since she'd arrived, they both knew it together, standing on the same side of the line. Which meant, for the first time, Harold Boone had a real problem. He just didn't know it yet. The 4 days between the fire and the town meeting were the 4 most deliberate days Clara Whitfield had ever lived. She did not panic. She did not pace. She sat at the kitchen table each morning after breakfast with Edmund Marsh's letter, the bank loan terms, and the cattle ledger, and she built her case the way her father had taught her to build an argument. From the ground up, nothing assumed, everything documented. Noah sat with her for 2 hours each morning before his chores. He didn't ask to. He just showed up, pulled out the chair across from hers, and started asking questions. And she answered them all, because he deserved answers, and because sharpening her thinking against his helped her find the weak places before Boone did. Ethan watched her do this from the doorway of the kitchen on the second morning, coffee in hand, saying nothing. She looked up and met his eyes and said, "You should be in this conversation." "I'm listening," he said. "That's not the same thing." He came in and sat down. It was the first time all 3 of them had worked at the same table, and something about it felt structural, like a third leg added to a stool that had been balancing on 2. "Boone's going to lead with the auction," Clara said. "He'll make it sound reckless, a desperate man buying a girl to run his household." "It was a legal arrangement," Ethan said. "Legal and wise are 2 different arguments in front of a crowd." She looked at him steadily. "He's not making a legal case. He's making a social one. He wants the room to feel uncomfortable, and then he wants Fitch sitting in that room to feel pressure." "So what's our play?" Noah asked. Clara and Ethan both looked at the 10-year-old. "Our play," Clara said, and she felt Ethan go still beside her at that word, at the shape of it, the way it drew a circle around all of them, "is to get to the room before Boone defines it. We don't wait for him to make accusations and then defend ourselves. We walk in with the cattle count, the loan terms, the evidence of what Griggs did under Boone's direction, and we put it on the table first." "He'll deny the Griggs connection," Ethan said. "He can't deny the ledger, and he can't deny that Griggs left the same week the discrepancy was found." She paused. "He also can't deny that the Walker Ranch is still standing after a fire, a drought, and a bank that's been leaning on you for 6 months. A mismanaged ranch doesn't survive all of that." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You think the room will listen?"
I think Agnes Pruitt has been talking to every woman in Dry Creek for 2 weeks, and I think women talk to their husbands at dinner. She picked up the ledger. I think the room is already listening. We just need to give them something worth hearing. Ethan looked at her. That long, measuring look she'd come to recognize as his version of trust being decided. Then he nodded once. "All right," he said. "Tell me what you need me to do." The morning of the town meeting, Caleb appeared at her door before dawn. She was already awake, dressed, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands in her lap, and the letter from Edmund Marsh folded in her pocket. She heard the small knock and said, "Come in." And he came in and stood there in the dark in his nightshirt, hair flattened on one side, looking both very young and entirely serious. "I want to come," he said. "Caleb, I know what you're going to say." "Then why are you here?" "Because I want you to say it to my face and let me argue." He crossed his arms. "I'm almost 8. I know what's happening. Boone wants to take our land and say bad things about you, and Pa's going to need people on his side in that room. I'm one of his people." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You understand that you have to be completely quiet, no matter what you hear." Something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. "I can do that. And you stay beside me the whole time." "Okay. And if I put my hand on your shoulder, it means sit down." "Okay." She picked up her letter from the dresser. "Go get dressed. Proper clothes." He was gone before she finished the sentence. They arrived at the Dry Creek Community Hall 40 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. Ethan had wanted to arrive exactly on time, the Walker pride of not seeming eager, and Clara had overruled him with a single sentence. "Boone arrives early to work the room. We need to work it first." He hadn't argued. Agnes Pruitt was already there, which didn't surprise Clara at all. Agnes had saved them 3 seats in the second row, conspicuously visible, and she pressed Clara's hand as she sat and said nothing, which said everything. The room filled steadily. Clara watched it happen. Farmers and their wives, the feed store owner, Doc Hensley, the school teacher, 2 of the county commissioners whose presence told her that whatever Boone had planned was more formally arranged than she'd hoped. People looked at the Walker group, Ethan, Clara, Caleb sitting very straight between them. Noah left home with Micah and Ray, and she felt the room's attention like a physical pressure. Harold Boone arrived 15 minutes before the meeting. He was a thick-built man in his 50s, with a banker's smile and a rancher's hands, and the particular ease of someone who had spent decades being the largest presence in any room he entered. He nodded at the commissioners. He shook hands with Fitch, who had appeared near the front. He surveyed the room with the calm satisfaction of a man who had already decided how this went. Then his eyes found Clara, and he stopped for one beat. One small, controlled beat. And she held his gaze without blinking until he looked away. "Good," she thought. "Now you know." The meeting opened with county business. Water rights, road maintenance, nothing that mattered to anyone here. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed, and she breathed steadily and waited. Beside her, Caleb sat with the focused stillness of a child who has made a promise and intends to keep it. Ethan sat on her other side, and he was very still in a different way. The stillness of a man holding himself in against the instinct to stand up and fight with his hands rather than his words. She knew that instinct. She didn't share it, but she understood it. Boone stood up when the county business finished. "If I might raise a community concern," he said, with perfect, practiced modesty. The room shifted. This was what they'd come for, and everyone knew it. "I want to speak carefully here," Boone said, "because this is about a neighbor, a man many of us have known for years." He paused for effect.
Ethan Walker is struggling. Everyone in this room knows that. The drought hit his land hard. He's behind on his loan, and 6 weeks ago, he purchased a young woman from the settlement auction to manage his household and care for 3 motherless children. A murmur through the room. Not hostile yet, just attentive. Now, I don't raise this to shame anyone, Boone continued, his voice carrying the warmth of a man doing something reluctant and necessary. But there are 3 children in that house, and the financial state of the Walker Ranch is improving, Clara said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Every head turned. Boone looked at her with the controlled expression of a man recalibrating, which told her he had not expected her to speak first, and that was already a victory. She stood up. She did not ask permission. She did not wait for the meeting chair to recognize her. She simply stood, and she held the ledger and the letter from Edmund Marsh, and she spoke in the clear, carrying voice her father had taught her to use in a schoolroom, the voice that reached every corner without raising. "My name is Clara Whitfield Walker," she said, and she felt Ethan go absolutely still beside her at that. The name she had not used before. The name that was both true and deliberate. "And I have managed the Walker Ranch accounts for the past 3 weeks. I'd like to share what I found, since Mr. Boone is so concerned with the ranch's financial state." A longer murmur. Agnes Pruitt's face in the second row was perfectly controlled. Doc Hensley was watching Clara with something professional respect. Boone smiled. Mrs. Walker, this is a community meeting, not an accounting session." "Then it should be easy to hear a few numbers," she said pleasantly, and opened the ledger. She laid it out simply and completely. The grazing rotation error, now corrected. The feed contract, now renegotiated to bulk pricing, saving the ranch $11 monthly. The bank loan terms, which Edmund Marsh had confirmed did not permit early calling without 60 days written notice, and she held up the letter, read the relevant section clearly, and watched Fitch in the front row go slightly pale. Then she paused. "There was a discrepancy in the cattle count," she said. 11 head unaccounted for. We investigated." She looked directly at Boone. A former hired hand named Tom Griggs had been moving cattle to a buyer in Hayes City. Mr. Griggs is no longer employed by the Walker Ranch. The cattle were recovered. She kept her voice perfectly even. Mr. Griggs cited pressure from outside the ranch as his motivation. "We chose not to pursue legal action, but the documentation exists if it becomes relevant." The room was very quiet. Boone's smile had not moved, but his eyes had. "That's a serious insinuation," he said. "It's a documented fact," she said. "The insinuation is yours to make of it what you will." A sound from the room, not quite laughter, something drier and more knowing. The kind of sound a room makes when it recognizes what's happening. Ethan stood up then, not quickly, deliberately, the way he did everything, with a weight behind it that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with certainty. He was a tall man, and when he stood in a room, people noticed, not because he made himself loud, but because he made himself real in a way that couldn't be ignored. "I want to say something about my household," he said. His voice was low and flat and absolute. "My wife, Clara, came to this ranch 6 weeks ago under circumstances that weren't ideal. That's the truth, and I won't dress it up." He paused. "What's also true is that she is the reason this ranch is still standing. She found the accounting problems. She brought in legal counsel. She helped save my cattle in a fire last Friday, while I was on the wrong side of a ridge." Another pause. "She is also the reason my boys are all right. And I will not stand in this room and let any man who has never once put their hand to the Walker land make claims about how that land is managed." The silence that followed was the good kind. the kind that means something has been said that can't be unsaid. And then Noah's voice came from the back of the room. Clara turned her head, and there he was. Noah, who was supposed to be home with Micah and Ray, who had apparently made his own decision about where he needed to be. He was standing at the back wall with Micah's hand in his, both of them slightly dusty from the road, and he had his father's jaw set and his mother's roses in his eyes, and he looked straight at Harold Boone when he said, "My ma taught us that strength means you show up for the people who need you. Miss Whitfield shows up every day." He didn't waver. "That's more than you've ever done for anyone in this county, Mr. Boone." The room broke open, not in chaos, in noise. Voices, a woman's sharp laugh, men turning to each other, Agnes Pruitt's hand over her mouth, Doc Hensley shaking his head with something that was definitely a smile. The two county commissioners leaned together and spoke quietly. Boone stood perfectly still. His smile was still technically in place, but it had gone tight at the corners. The smile of a man watching the room leave him. Fitch stood up from the front row. He addressed Ethan directly, not Boone, and Clara noted that very carefully. "Mr. Walker, based on what's been presented here, I see no current grounds for early action on your loan. The 60-day provision is correct." He paused. He did not look at Boone. "We'll continue under the existing terms." That was the moment. That was when Harold Boone stopped being the largest presence in the room. He sat down. He said nothing else. And the meeting moved on, and all of Dry Creek understood what had just happened, and nobody needed to say so. Caleb had been silent through all of it, true to his word, completely still, hands flat on his knees, jaw set with the effort of it. When the meeting ended and people began standing and moving, he stayed seated for one more moment. Then he looked up at Clara and said, very quietly, so only she could hear, "You said our name." She looked down at him. "What?" "Clara Whitfield Walker. You said our name." His voice was very careful, the voice of a child holding something fragile. "Does that mean you're keeping it?" She crouched down to his level. Right there, in the middle of the community hall, with people moving around them, she looked at this fierce, frightened, entirely lovable boy, and she said, "I said it because it's true. And yes, I'm keeping it." His jaw worked once. He looked away. He looked back. "Okay," he said, in the voice that meant everything was not okay. Everything was almost too much to hold, and okay was the only word big enough for it. "Okay." Noah reached them through the crowd with Micah in tow, and Micah looked up at Clara and said, in that direct, matter-of-fact way of his, "We walked from the ranch." "I know," she said. "You shouldn't have." "We had to," he said simply, as if that settled it. Ethan found all of them together near the door. He looked at Noah first, the look of a father who had 100 things to say about unauthorized trips to town, and who understood exactly why his son had made it, and who was fighting a losing battle with both of those facts simultaneously. "We'll talk about this later," he said. "Yes, sir," Noah said. "You did good," Ethan said in the same breath, and Noah's whole face changed. Clara stepped slightly to the side to give them that moment, and she felt a hand find hers in the crowd. Small. Certain. She looked down. Micah. He had taken her hand with the same calm certainty with which he did everything, as if it were simply the logical thing to do, and he'd been waiting for the right moment. She closed her hand around his and held on. Agnes Pruitt appeared at her elbow. "Harold Boone will not forget this," she said quietly. "I know," Clara said. "Men like him have longer memories than pride."
I know that too. Clara looked at Agnes. But he's out of legal options and out of allies in this room. What does he have left? Agnes was quiet for a moment. Nothing clean, she said finally. It was the answer Clara had expected. It was also the answer that meant this wasn't over. Boone had been embarrassed in public by a 22-year-old woman and a 10-year-old boy, and small men with long memories did not absorb that quietly. She filed it away, the same way she had filed his name the first time she heard it. Not with fear, but with the precision of someone who knows where the next trouble is coming from, and intends to be standing when it arrives. On the wagon ride home, the five of them settled in the familiar arrangement. Ethan and Clara on the bench, the three boys in the back. The sun was dropping west, the Kansas sky going amber and wide. Caleb had fallen asleep against Noah's shoulder, which Noah was pretending not to notice. Micah sat at the tailgate with his feet dangling and watched the road go by. After a long while, Ethan said, "Clara Whitfield Walker." She didn't look at him. "You used that name before I asked you to," he said. "I used the name that was true," she said. "That's all." Another silence. The wagon rolled. The sky deepened. "It doesn't bother you?" he asked. "How we started?" She considered this. "It bothers me that there are systems that put women in that position," she said. "It doesn't bother me where I ended up." She paused. "Does it bother you?" "Every day," he said, "but not the way you might think." She waited. "It bothers me that you deserved better than an auction block," he said. "It doesn't bother me that you're here. Not anymore." He kept his eyes on the road. "I want you to know the difference." She looked at his profile, the weathered jaw, the silver at his temples, the hands on the reins. And she thought about 14 months of grief and 4 days of preparation, and $43 and 3 boys, and a fixed porch step, and a name said in a crowded room. "I know the difference," she said. The Walker Ranch appeared at the end of the track, solid and standing, roses still burning red along the porch rail. They were home. And Harold Boone, somewhere behind them in Dry Creek, was already planning what came next. Boone moved faster than she'd expected. 3 days after the town meeting, Edmund Marsh's letter arrived. Not the one she'd been waiting for, but a different one, urgent and short, the handwriting less careful than usual. She read it at the kitchen table before anyone else was awake, in the gray early light, and she read it twice to make sure she understood it correctly. Boone had filed a petition with the county court, not about the loan, not about the land, about the children. The petition claimed that the Walker household was unstable, that the presence of a woman obtained through a settlement auction constituted an unsuitable environment for 3 minor children, that the court should appoint a review to determine whether the boys ought to be placed in the care of a more established family arrangement. Clara set the letter down on the table. She sat with it for a full minute. Just sat with it, breathing, letting the full shape of it settle over her. This was the clean option Boone had left. Agnes had been right. He was out of financial moves and out of social ones. So he had gone for the one thing that would hurt most and be hardest to fight. Not the land. The boys. She was still sitting there when Ethan came downstairs. He read it standing up. She watched his face, and it went through things she had never seen on it before. Not the controlled grief or the careful courtesy or even the open fear from the day of the fire. This was something older and rawer than all of those. This was a man who had already lost one thing he couldn't survive losing, and was looking at the possibility of losing 3 more. When he looked up, his voice was very quiet and completely steady, which was the most frightened she had ever heard him.
They can't do this. They're trying to, she said. And we have 2 weeks before the court date. She kept her own voice level, because one of them needed to be. Marsh says we have strong grounds. We have the fire, the town meeting testimony, the financial improvements, Ray Decker as witness to the ranch's stability. But Boone's lawyer is Samuel Crouch, and Crouch is... I know who Crouch is. Ethan set the letter down. His hands were flat on the table. He buried the Hendersons in court 2 years ago.
Took their water rights.
I know. Marsh mentioned him. She looked at Ethan directly. We need to be married, properly, before the court date. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind, or the charged kind, or even the careful kind. It was simply the silence of 2 people who had arrived somewhere unexpected and were taking a moment to understand where they stood. You mean legally documented, Ethan said. I mean a real ceremony, on record, a minister, witnesses, the full thing. She kept her gaze steady. Right now, I am a woman of unclear status in your household. Crouch will use that. He'll call me temporary. He'll call the arrangement informal. He'll tell the court that your children have no stable maternal figure, only a... She paused, choosing the word carefully. A transaction. Ethan's jaw had gone tight. You're telling me to marry you, to protect my sons. I'm telling you that it would protect them legally. And I'm telling you that it's your decision, not mine to make for you. She folded her hands on the table. I'm not asking for anything from you that you don't genuinely want to give. But I needed you to know what was at stake. He looked at her for a very long time. Then he said, What do you want? She hadn't expected that question. She thought she had, but she hadn't. I want those boys safe, she said. I know that. I'm asking what else? She held his gaze. I want to stay, she said, and it was the most honest thing she had said since the auction. Not because of the court date, not because I have nowhere else to go, because I want to be here. She paused. That's what I want. Ethan looked at her with that expression she had learned over 6 weeks, the measuring look that was really a trusting look, the wall with a door in it look, and said, All right? All right, you understand what I'm saying? Or all right, you... All right, I want you to stay. He said it the same way he said everything that mattered, flat and certain, and with no room in it for doubt. I've wanted you to stay for a while now. I just didn't know how to say so without it sounding like I was trying to own the outcome. Clara felt something release in her chest that she hadn't fully known was held. You should have led with that, she said. Something that was definitely, unmistakably a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. It was brief and quiet, and it was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it was enough to understand why Ellen Walker had planted roses. I'll work on it, he said. They told the boys that morning at breakfast. Ethan did it himself, which Clara had suggested, and which she could tell he'd spent the night preparing for. He waited until everyone had food in front of them, and then he said, without preamble, There's something happening with the court. Boone's trying to interfere with our family. Clara and I are going to make sure he can't. 3 boys looked at him, then at Clara, then back at him. What does that mean? Noah said. It means we're getting married, properly, before the court date. Another silence. Clara watched all 3 faces carefully. Noah's expression went through a rapid series of calculations. She could almost see him running the numbers, measuring the situation, checking it for integrity, the way he checked the ledger. Whatever he found, it settled him. He nodded once. Good, he said. Caleb had gone very still. He was staring at his plate,
His jaw was tight. Clara braced herself. "Is it because you have to?" he said without looking up. "Or because you want to?" Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Caleb. "Both," she said. "And I want you to know the difference." She waited until he looked up. "I want to stay because I want to stay, Caleb." The court date made the timing urgent. It didn't make the choice. He held her gaze.
7 years old, and every bit as sharp as his father, and twice as unguarded about it. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Something shifted in his face. The stubbornness cracked in a particular way, the way it did when he got something he'd stopped believing in. He looked back down at his plate. "Okay," he said. "Can I come?" "To the ceremony?" Clara said. "Yeah." "Obviously," she said. He picked up his fork. "Good. I'm wearing my good shirt." Micah, who had been eating steadily through all of this with the unrattled calm of someone who had already known what the answer was going to be, set down his cup and looked at Clara and said, "I knew." "Knew what?" she asked. "That you'd stay." He picked his cup back up. "Since the second day." Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Ethan. And for a moment, held between them over a breakfast table with 3 boys and the morning light, was something that didn't have a name yet, but was almost certainly the beginning of one. Edmund Marsh arrived in Dry Creek 4 days before the court date. He was a compact, energetic man in his 60s, with her father's habit of talking with his hands, and a lawyer's habit of saying exactly as much as was needed and not a word more. He shook Ethan's hand, nodded at the boys, and then took Clara's hands in both of his and said, "Your father would be proud, and concerned, and probably furious, in that order." He paused. "But mostly proud." She had not expected that. She pressed her lips together and got herself back under control in about 2 seconds, which she thought her father would also have approved of. Marsh sat at the kitchen table and laid out the case with clean precision. The fire, documented by Ray Decker and 2 neighbors who had seen the aftermath. The financial improvements, documented by the ledger and the new feed contract. The testimony from Agnes and Jim Pruitt. The town meeting itself, witnessed by 40 residents of Dry Creek County. "Crouch will argue the auction arrangement is inherently unstable," Marsh said. "He'll argue that a woman who entered the household under those circumstances cannot be considered a genuine maternal figure." "Then we argue back," Clara said. "We do. But I want you to understand what Crouch is good at, which is making people feel small in front of a room." He looked at her directly. "He's going to try to make you feel like you don't belong here, in front of the judge, in front of whoever's in that courtroom. He's going to be personal, and he's going to be deliberate, and he is going to try to make you react." "I won't." "I know you won't. I'm telling you anyway." He folded his hands. "Because the moment a woman loses her composure in a room like that, the room stops hearing her argument and starts confirming what they already believed." He paused. "Your father knew that. He taught it to every student he had." "He taught it to me first," she said. Marsh smiled. "I know. That's why I came." The ceremony happened on a Tuesday, 3 days before the court date, in the Dry Creek Church with the minister Reverend Aldgate, Agnes and Jim Pruitt as witnesses, and all 3 Walker boys in the front pew. Caleb wore his good shirt. Noah had combed his hair with visible effort and equal visible regret. Micah sat very straight and watched everything with the intense focus of someone committing it to permanent memory. It was not a long ceremony. Reverend Aldgate was a practical man, and the situation was what it was. But when Ethan Walker took her hand at the altar, his grip was steady, and his eyes were on her, and there was nothing in them that was transactional or obligatory or temporary. "I take you," he said, "because I choose to." It was not in the standard vows. He had added it himself, and Clara felt the particular quality of it, the deliberateness, the Ethan Walker way of saying important things plainly and once. And she held on to it.
"I take you," she said, "because I choose to, and because 3 boys with very strong opinions chose you first."
From the front pew, Caleb made a sound that was not a laugh, but was in the same family as one. Noah pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling. Micah smiled the small, certain smile of a child who had known all along. The courtroom in the Dry Creek County seat was smaller than she'd imagined. Boone and Crouch were already seated when the Walkers arrived. Crouch was a lean, angular man with a quality of stillness that Clara recognized as calculated. The stillness of a predator, not the stillness of a patient man. He looked at her when she came in, and she met his eyes, and she didn't look away, and something in his expression shifted very slightly. He had expected her to drop her gaze. She noted that he'd expected it, and moved on. Boone sat beside him looking at his hands. He was not smiling. He had not looked at any of them since they entered. That told her something too. The judge was a woman named Harriet Voss, which no one on Boone's side had apparently anticipated, and which Clara had known from Marsh's research for 5 days. Judge Voss had presided over county court for 11 years, had 3 grown children, and had a particular documented impatience with what she called proxy suits, cases brought by parties whose actual grievance was financial rather than the stated claim. Marsh stood and presented their case with the economy and precision of a man who had been doing this for 40 years. Every document, every witness statement, Ray Decker's affidavit, Agnes Pruitt's, the fire, the cattle recovery, the ledger improvements, the wedding certificate, 3 days old. Clara sat at the table with her hands folded and her face composed, and she let Marsh do his work, and she breathed. Crouch began his argument with a smooth, almost warm quality, the register of a man doing something reluctant and responsible. He laid out Boone's stated concerns, the auction origins of the arrangement, the instability, the children's welfare. He was good. She gave him that. He made something deliberately built to harm sound like something reluctantly admitted to help. Then he looked at Clara. "Mrs. Walker," he said, and the way he shaped the name had a question in it, like the title was provisional. "You entered this household 6 weeks ago under a settlement auction arrangement. Is that correct?" "It is," she said. "You had no prior relationship with Mr. Walker or his children?" "No." "You were, in a sense, purchased?" "In a legal and financial sense, an arrangement was made, yes." She kept her voice level. "As with many marriages in this territory and this time, economic circumstances were part of the foundation. I don't believe that is unusual, and I suspect the court is aware it isn't." A small sound from behind her, from the gallery. She didn't turn. Crouch pressed. He asked about the fire. Wasn't it reckless? A woman with no frontier experience, putting herself in danger with 3 children nearby? He asked about the town meeting. Wasn't it presumptuous? A new arrival taking it upon herself to interfere in a legal bank matter? To each question, Clara answered directly, without decoration, without apology. The fire, she had acted because inaction would have cost the cattle and possibly the children's safety. The bank matter, she had applied her education and her documented skills to a problem affecting her household. She answered as though the questions were reasonable, which stripped them of the weight Crouch needed them to carry. Then Crouch said, "Is it not true that you had no other options than this arrangement? That the auction was your only alternative to destitution?" She looked at him. That's correct. And doesn't that suggest that your presence in the Walker household is more about your own circumstances than genuine care for those children? The room was very quiet. Clara said, I had no other options when I arrived. I have other options now. I have a lawyer in Wichita who has offered me clerical work. I have skills that are marketable. I am not here because I have nowhere else to go. She paused. I am here because I choose to be. Those two things are different, and I think the court understands the difference between a woman who stays because she must and a woman who stays because she wants to. Crouch moved on, but the room had heard it. Then Noah Walker stood up. He was not called. He was not a scheduled witness. He simply stood up from the gallery bench, 10 years old in his combed hair, and said, Your Honor, may I say something? Judge Voss looked at him over her spectacles for a long moment. Then she said, You may. He walked forward, and he stood in the middle of that courtroom, and he looked at the judge, and not at Boone, and he said, My mother died 14 months ago, and after she died, my dad tried really hard, but he was real sad, and we were real sad, and the ranch started going bad, and my brothers needed somebody to be there, and nobody stayed. He stopped, swallowed. Miss Whitfield, Mrs. Walker. She's the first person who looked at my brother Caleb being angry and said he was smart instead of bad. She's the first person who sat with Micah when he woke up scared and didn't make him feel like a problem. She taught me the ledgers so I could help my dad. He paused. She ran into a fire for us. And then she learned how to count cattle, even though she'd never done it before, because she said the ranch was hers, and she was going to know it right. His voice held steady through all of it. I don't know what this court thinks about how she came here, but I know she stayed because she wanted to. Because she shows up every single day, and nobody makes her, and she does it anyway. He walked back to his seat. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Voss made a note on her paper. Then she looked at Boone and Crouch for a long moment, the look of a woman who has heard what she needed to hear and is deciding how direct to be about what comes next. Mr. Crouch, she said, I find the petition's claims unsupported by the evidence presented today. The Walker household demonstrates financial improvement, documented stability, and by all accounts, a functioning family structure. She set down her pen. Petition denied. She looked over her spectacles at Boone. Mr. Boone, I want to be direct with you. This court does not exist to resolve land acquisition disputes through the back door of child welfare claims. If I see this approach used again in my courtroom, the consequences will be rather more significant than a denied petition. Are we clear? Boone said, very quietly, Yes, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, in the flat, bright Kansas afternoon, Clara stood on the steps and breathed. Ethan came to stand beside her, not close enough to be touching, just beside her, in the way they had learned to stand side by side, present and parallel and real. They stood there together for a moment. It's over, he said. Boone won't come at us again, she said. Not like that. Voss made it costly. She paused. The land issue is still there. He still wants the north pasture. Then we deal with it. He looked at her. Together. She looked at him. I've been dealing with things together with you for 6 weeks. You're getting less terrible at it. That smile again, brief and quiet and hers. High praise, he said. Extremely, she agreed. Noah appeared at her right side. Without ceremony, without asking, he leaned slightly against her arm, the small, unconscious weight of a child who has decided where he belongs. She felt it and did not make a thing of it and kept looking at the street. Caleb came down the steps and stood in front of both of them and crossed his arms and announced, I'm hungry. You're always hungry, Noah said.
That's not a counter-argument. Micah came last, moving through the space between Ethan and Clara, and stopped with one hand on each of them, looking up at his father, and then at Clara with that dark, serious gaze that took everything in and missed nothing. "Can we go home now?" he asked. Ethan looked down at his youngest son. Then he looked at Clara. "Yeah," he said, "we can go home." On the wagon home, with the three boys settled in the back and the late summer light going golden over the Kansas plain, Ethan reached across the bench and put his hand over hers where it rested on her knee. Not grasping, not claiming, just placed there, the way you place something important somewhere you intend to keep it. She turned her hand over and held on. Behind them, Kayla was telling Noah about the judge's glasses. Noah was pretending not to be interested. Micah was watching the road unspool behind them, with that expression he always wore when he was memorizing something he didn't want to forget. The Walker Ranch came into view at the end of the rutted track, roses still burning red along the porch rail, the fence lines clean and solid, Ray Decker moving in the east pasture. Home. Standing. Hers. She had arrived on a July morning with $43 placed against her future, and nothing she'd chosen in any of it. She had stayed through storms and fires and a courtroom, and a man who said important things plainly and once, and three boys who had needed her in three completely different ways and had never once made her feel like less than what she was. She had not been saved. She had not been rescued. She had simply been given enough room to choose, and she had chosen this land, this family, this man beside her, with his hand over hers on the wagon bench. And she would choose it again tomorrow, and the day after. And that was not nothing. That was everything. Micah's voice came from the wagon bed, quiet and certain. "We're home." "Yeah," Clara said. "We are." The wagon rolled through the gate, and the Walker Ranch received them all. She was bought in the heat of summer, but every day after, she chose to stay.